Good morning, Thomas. You okay?
Good morning. Yes, how's it going?
Really good, thank you. I'm really excited to talk with you well, we're going to talk about lots of things, but the reason we're here is to talk about this. So if you're listening to the podcast version, you won't know what I'm holding up. But this is the new copy of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the new edition of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which Thomas, there he is, there's your name.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, you've had your paperbacks through this week as well, have you?
There we go. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
it.
there
Got
you
mine.
go. This beautiful new edition of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. So we're going to be talking about that. Just before we started recording, actually, Thomas was also saying, will we end up talking about James Bond? And inevitably, of course, we will end up talking about James Bond because it's me and because it's Thomas. And if you don't know Thomas's work already, why not? But if you don't know Thomas's work, head over to Instagram and you can see how much Thomas loves James Bond because you've been producing James Bond posters, amazing James Bond posters on Instagram for quite some time, haven't you?
That is right. Yeah. I mean, it started in lockdown 2020.
Mm.
And in lockdown we all did kind of slightly obscure things. I turned to making some James Bond covers for Ian
Whereas
Fleming.
I created a website called License to Queer. You know, we
Yeah,
did what we needed to
we
get
did
us
what we had to
through.
do. Yeah.
Exactly.
And
So
so I did those, and then I did lots of James Bond inspired travel
mhm.
posters as well. This was just all about escapism. We couldn't get out, and I was trying to imagine I was traveling the world with James Bond in posters. So
Yeah,
yeah,
pretty
that's
much.
where all of this started and snowballed from.
It's not just James Bond posters, is it? I mean, there's a lot of James Bond posters that you've done, but you've also done posters for other films. I particularly like the one that you did for the film Nope, where it wasn't the poster, it was the house, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I did that one. In a weird sort of way, that one led into doing this book because I drew the
Oh,
house in a style
well, I
which
had
led me to how I was going to draw Chitty. So in a really weird sort of way, that was quite a significant poster for me.
Oh, okay. So I promise we didn't plan this as a natural segue. That just happened. So so basically, how did you end up getting the gig of illustrating Ian Fleming's Chitty Chitty Bang Bang? Which obviously, if you're not already familiar, it's its 60th anniversary this year, and so really really important. So how did you end up getting the gig?
Well, I think I have Kim Sherwood to thank mainly. She picked up my covers and my posters that I was doing on Instagram, and I think she kindly shoved them under the nose of
Mm.
everyone at Ian Fleming and pestered them to get in touch with me, which they did. And I suppose, and we talked a bit about doing this or that, and then in the end, the thing that the project that stuck was Chitty.
Yeah.
They talked about doing cover art for this or that, and then they said, actually, do you want to illustrate a whole book? And I sort of went and thought about that quietly for a while because that's a bit of a bigger job. And obviously, then I jumped at it. So that's how that came about.
You say it's a big job. I imagine there were some long hours after work because you this is pretty cool actually. So if listeners and watchers aren't aware, um, Ian Fleming himself wanted his friend Amherst Villiers, who is a car engineer, who obviously gets name checked in the Bond books, but he wanted him to illustrate Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and he did do one of the initial drawings of the car, if memory serves correct. But it was never actually published in. It was never actually used in the book because there were other illustrators involved at the time. So you are, to my knowledge anyway, the first car designer, the first
Hmm.
person who works on cars
Yeah.
to actually have illustrated Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which is what Fleming originally wanted. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, I mean, it's a cool feeling. But I mean, the thing that came across, I think, when we were starting the book is that Ian Fleming, the people there said, we need someone who can really, really do the car justice.
Mm.
The book is called The Name of the Car for a reason because it's all about the car.
Yeah.
So approaching a car designer made perfect sense to them. When they did that and asked me to start looking at it, I didn't go off and design a car as such, though. I looked at the history of it. I found that Ian Fleming was actually inspired to write the book by a real life car. And so the book uses that exact car. So this is a real life Chitty as inspired. by the car that Ian Fleming saw when he was, I think I read he was 8 years old. He saw it racing at Brooklands, and it seared itself into his memory. So
So
yeah, this feels like a tribute back to Fleming as well, to be drawing that car that he saw. So
this might sound like a really stupid, obvious question, but I take it you like cars.
yes, just a bit. Yeah, no, I'm definitely a car guy, that's for sure.
So someone who designs cars also gets to illustrate the cars in well the car in
The
Chitty Chitty
car,
Bang Bang now.
yeah.
But it's not just the car that you illustrate, is it? So obviously illustrations require the settings, the locations. You've got some buildings in there. One of the things that I haven't seen much on your art on Instagram, and obviously you're a very proficient artist in all regards, but is that I haven't seen many figures in your Instagram art. So obviously we need the characters in
Yeah,
there you go.
yeah.
So how much fun was it doing the characters compared with the cars and the vehicles, or actually is doing characters kind of not as interesting to you?
The opposite, actually. No, I mean, I really like drawing characters, people.
Mm,
I don't draw them from observation. I just
mm,
draw them, and I tend to just sort of do a scrappy sketch, underlay it, draw it again, flip it, redraw it, and kind of develop a character as if I'm designing
mm,
them, not
mm-hmm.
drawing them from life, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah, yeah.
So whether I'm designing a car or a building or a character, it's all design work in a way. I for the style I was using for the people and for the way that their faces, figures are
Yeah.
constructed, I was looking more at the art of Pixar and that sort of thing, and
Ah,
artists design and create those characters.
mm,
So that was the reference point there. But I mean, in
right.
terms of my favorite things to draw in the book, I think characters are actually up there, with the car itself, because it's quite, I don't know, it's quite relaxing, I think, to draw figures in a way that most other things aren't.
Is that because it is a bit more distant from the
No,
day job?
I think when you're drawing a car or a building, you have to be quite precise.
Right.
These are industrial objects, but when you're drawing a person, it's just you can just be looser. If you make a slight mistake, it doesn't ever look like one.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I enjoyed them.
It is a very precise design of the car.
Mm.
I've never seen Chitty be quite this angular before. I've got various different editions of this book. It's such a striking design. Was that something you were really, really conscious of?
Yeah, I mean, there was this, I was looking at the images of the old car. So it was a chap named Count Zabrowski, who designed and built the real car in 1920 or 21. And there was this amazing photo. I wish I had it to hand actually. It's a side view photo of the car, and he sat in it, looking really rakish, like the coolest man on the planet, basically, which I think was how he was regarded,
Mm,
with a pipe in his mouth and a cap and everything. And he sat in his car, and it's just this enormous long bonnet, really angular thing. It's this really brutalist design. It had no frills, it had no niceties. It was just sort of raw metal, bare bones, designed for speed. And so I kept that image kind of fixed in my head the whole time, like this is the car. And as you read the story, kind of Fleming makes references like it looks like a flying bomb, or it's a green monster. There's phrases like this where I was like, actually, this picture just rings true with those. It's a lovable family car, but at the same time, it's an absolute beast. So yeah.
and very different to all the other vehicles in the story, obviously, because
Mm.
um, I'll be honest, even though I've read Chitty Bang Bang so many times before, I've always struggled to kind of locate the time period in which
Mhm.
it's set because it's
Yeah,
such a brilliant story, and you can read it, nowadays as and it feels just as fresh as it did 60 years ago.
yeah,
But then the thing that stopped me short was when I had an illustration of yours of the VW Beetle. And I was like, oh, hang on a second. We're actually, so there it is for the
yeah, yeah,
video viewers. We had the VW Beetle there, and then you see Chitty in traffic later on. And basically all of the other cars, the whole point, I believe, uh,
yeah.
is to show that the cars, which is slightly anthropomorphized there as well, they've got like
Very,
eyes
very,
going on the headlights.
yeah.
But that Chitty really does stand out in the crowd. So yeah, so Fleming seems to have had it in for the VW Beetle
He
himself.
really did.
He
I mean,
does specifically
yeah,
mention it.
there's numerous digs at VW Beetles. I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know what was on his mind at the time, but he was really loathing them. So, so when I was drawing any other car, it was just like this ubiquitous, supposedly hateful Beetle, which is the antithesis of everything Chitty is, because it's this, huge
Mm.
aircraft engine pre-war monster. So yeah, I had fun with that one.
Which were your other favorite illustrations to do?
I think, I mean, in terms of my favorites, I think the ones where I got to just expand it to a full page,
Mm.
that was just always so exciting to kind of, to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to do a full page illustration here and just go for it. And I mean, I loved doing this one. There we
Yeah,
go.
that was great. Yeah.
So that one just felt like, I don't know, just a complete folly of just let's just draw and not think.
Mm.
I just sort of did that one throughout an
Mm.
evening and didn't really kind of pause for the whole time I did it, because I wanted it to kind of feel like a breathless race against time of a
Mm.
picture. And another favorite one of mine was this one. So I liked
Yeah.
this was a tricky one to get, and it took me quite a long time to get to this one, where it could be quite sinister, the child snatchers, basically, to use the
Mm.
word. But it was quite fun to kind of get a bit of comedy and a bit of child friendliness into it. So that one came quite late on in the process, but it was a really enjoyable one to do because I could kind of meld a bit of comedy,
Mm.
a bit of cars, a bit of French architecture, which I love, and all that sort of thing, and create something quite moody.
Mm.
A few people have said there's some film noir in there, sort of tucked in, which is
Yeah,
surprising for
I get
children.
that.
But I think when you're drawing something 60s, when you've got that kind of car, when you've got a few gangsters, it's a bit inevitable to go noir, isn't it? So
Oh, 100%. And I was just going to highlight that one in particular. I really
yeah,
love
that's
that
another
one.
one. Yeah.
That's very that's the most film noir to me. Very I'm always conscious of my pronunciation of this word, despite having taught film noir to students. But is it chiaroscuro or chiaroscuro? One of those, the extreme contrast between light and dark.
You're teaching me actually. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But I
I was
mean,
I was feeling so self-conscious talking to an artist about high contrast. Sorry.
no, I mean the other one, the one that people point at is there we go, that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of the lurking in the light
Mm,
and the shadows kind of thing. Um I mean I suppose actually I've said the only cards are Chitty and the Beetle, but this is the other car in the
yeah.
book.
Yeah.
So this one I based on a Facile Vega, which is this absolutely phenomenal 60s coupe, which
Mm,
I've always looked at that and just thought that is the epitome of the kind of the European gangster's car. So,
mm,
as soon as I read the book, that was the car that was in my mind, I think
yeah.
subconsciously. So,
So, what was the process that you actually went through to decide what to illustrate and which approaches to take?
well, I've got actually some original sketches here.
Oh, brilliant.
Flick through to hand. So when it came to the car, when it came to the brief to do the book, the first thing I did was, like I say, look at the history, the real life Chitty, and then design the car at the center of the whole thing. And from there, I thought about the era. So, okay, it's definitely in the 60s. There's a tedious detail where it says the motorway's just opened. So I'm like, okay, it's
Mm,
the 60s. Fine, we'll do that. That
mm,
makes
mm,
sense. Um, and so then from there, my thought process went, okay, so in the story, Chitty has she's mutating herself to be able to fly. She's doing that herself. So, kind of TARDIS-like, is she doing that by looking at the world around her,
mm,
kind of, doing this herself?
mm,
And so I thought like 60s jet age Britain. Okay,
yeah.
so when Chitty flies, she's going to look like a jet fighter.
Mm,
It's something really different from what everyone else has done. And so that was really the center point of everything that I did.
yes.
Um, and I suppose at that point in the process, my head was probably spinning with possibilities. But I think then basically what I just did was I went through the book. Here we go. So this is the previous edition of the book, and
Mm.
I picked out every spot in the book where I thought that's a picture, that needs to be a
Wow.
picture, to be a picture, that needs to be a picture.
Yeah.
I post-ited every single one. A big post-it means a big picture, a little post-it means a little picture. So this was my process.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the actual one. And I think I did that and I came to something like 50 illustrations just by going through the book and just picking out all those best beats. And I think we arrived at something like 46, 47. So most of those made it. Um, and then when it came, and then one by one, I went through those post-its and drew them, starting in scrappy pencil sketches and then gradually refining, evolving um, into the neat final pen drawings, which I think in total that took about 6 months. I was doing the pencils before Christmas and then all the pens from about February time.
Wow.
So there we go. So we've got some pencils here, which
Ooh.
so that's the original size sketch of Chitty that I did.
Oh, wow.
Wheels drawn separately because they get
Mhm.
posted on later. You can see the original pencil drawing of Caractacus looking at the
Yeah.
suite here.
Hmm.
They're a bit they've kind of got a different feel in pencil, which
Mm. Mm.
they wouldn't have printed so well in pencil, which is why you do
No.
pen in the end. Um, there we go. You can see the scrapyard one as a nice example. Whoop,
Mm.
there we go, angle it towards. So my process was to basically to open the book at a random point and to draw that picture one by one. And I suppose essentially what I was trying to do was if I didn't draw the pictures from the start of the book to the end of the book, if I just drew them in a completely random jumbled order, then when you pick up the book, it feels consistent. Um, yeah, so I didn't want to accidentally be drawing Chitty slightly differently as I went through.
Yeah, and it
By
evolved,
the end of the book, and
changed.
this doesn't
Yeah.
look like the same car. That'd be like
Mm.
the worst for
Mm.
continuity. So I drew them in a really random order for consistency's sake. And then at the very end of the process, so you can see they've got kind of a cool grey kind of infill on the pen
Hmm.
lines.
Hmm.
So what I did was I drew, I've got some pen sketches here as well. So these are some original pens. So they were all just inked like this. And then there was this lovely finishing process at the end where I scanned them, and in digital, I just added those layers of grey, which kind of really makes them
Wow.
pop. So
So a heck of a lot of work.
heck of a lot of work. Yeah, and I mean some in terms of the creative process as well. I think I don't know if it's something I think it's something I've acquired through doing posters and just sort of
Mm.
scrutinizing movies to do posters. But when you kind of you pick out a line of dialogue or text in the book and you think that could be a great picture,
Mm.
but how do you frame that picture? How do you view it? How do you scene it and draw it and light
Mm.
it, all that kind of thing? And I think had it not been for doing posters and obsessing over posters for the last 3 years, I probably wouldn't have been quite so well set up to
Yeah,
do,
yeah.
because I've got my movie head on. I think that really helped.
Good.
So
So
that's
Pixar was an influence perhaps on some of the character kind of styles.
yeah,
I was intrigued by early on in the book, the Scrumptious Factory, which has a monorail outside.
yeah,
And
yeah,
for me, it's funny what you were saying just about the jet age, and it almost did. It felt quite steampunky in some sort of senses, or some kind of retro futuristic. This is where I'm just going to throw random
mm,
terminology around different art styles
yeah,
around here, but it had. I don't mean steampunk in the sense of you've got steam engines and it's futuristic and all that sort of thing. I mean in the sense of something being a bit out of time. I don't
yeah.
know if that was that something conscious as well.
Yeah, yeah, it was a bit. I mean, because I was trying to think of, I mean, how do you frame this 1920s car
Mm.
in jet age 1960s Britain? There's kind of already a disconnect there.
Yeah.
And and then that leads you to lots of interesting creative choices. I mean, even down to, I agonized over do we have a mid-century font or an Art Deco font on the cover? So it does create a kind of an interesting,
Mm.
like I say, it could be a disconnect, but actually it's more of an opportunity. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think previous chitties, interestingly, especially the Scream one, they do have this more what I would call steampunk
Mm.
to them. Steampunk to me is kind of when you have, you know, brass and bolts and, it kind of feels like it's going to fly, but in a real
Mm.
pre-World War One sort of sense.
Yeah,
You know, feathers and canvas and scarves in the wind and all that kind of thing.
yeah,
That's in your
yeah.
steampunk. And I wanted, I felt when you read the book's kind of like all Fleming writing. It's kind of got this more clean cut
Mm.
60s sort of modernism to it.
Yeah.
So it's like between the words somehow. You kind of can't put your finger on it. So it didn't feel right for me to be drawing Chitty in
No.
that really steampunk way. But
Mm.
at the same time, it's a 1920s car, so you can't just completely abandon it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. So you've mentioned obviously Fleming,
Yeah.
and you being a fellow fan as well. And so which we jumped straight into Chitty here. What's your favorite Fleming book? And you can't say Chitty just because you've illustrated it.
No, my favorite. I've got my really battered copy that I've read. I don't know how many times here. So Moonraker for me,
Mm.
my absolute number one, by some distance. I mean, you can see it's absolutely knackered because I've read it so many times. And I adore this cover as well. So I'd never part with it. But
It's
I mean,
funny you say sorry. It's funny you say Moonraker because obviously there's I've written an article about Chitty and the links with James Bond. It's probably got the most links with Moonraker because obviously it shares some similar locations to the
yeah,
same locations for Moonraker, doesn't it?
yeah. No, that actually helped because I've always had a really I've read Moonraker lots of times and it's always I think partly why it's my favorite is it conjures this really it's got a really well developed sense of place, sense of
Mm.
the detail he goes into designing the buildings and the places and the feel of this British summer air. I suppose when Britain had a summer, it doesn't this year. And on the south coast, and it conjures such a vivid sense of all of it. You can almost draw the pictures in your head as you're reading the book, which
Mm.
in every Fleming novel, that's not quite the case. Sometimes he's a bit more kind of abstract with the way things go, or maybe it's just too fast paced to kind of always
Mm.
capture it. But I think as Moonraker doesn't swap locations too often,
Yeah.
feel like you're right in it. And that the images it creates are a bit like the chocolate factory with the monorail you pointed at.
Yeah.
To me, it kind of has that look, this rocket that's like this sort of, I think he describes it as a razor sharp needle point and all this kind of thing. It's
Mm.
everything shiny and chrome and clean
Mm.
concrete and
Mm.
yeah, whistling
Yeah.
jets flying overhead and all that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, it probably on a subconscious level, it probably did influence me.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I won't spoil the very final page because that last, I suppose we call it a splash page, like in comic books when you kind of have
Yeah.
the yeah. I won't spoil that last one, but I did particularly love it's Canterbury, isn't it, where they're flying over at that point? Is that right?
That one's Dover Castle,
Dover
actually.
Castle, that's it, not
Yeah.
Canterbury. There we go.
So in
Yeah,
the story, it goes over, I think it's Canterbury Cathedral and then
that's it.
Dover Castle.
That's right.
So I like the idea that it's the soldiers on the castle looking at it and other bystanders just looking.
Mm.
This was sort of a I love it's especially Roger Moore Bond films, isn't it? You always get a confused bystander. And I thought we've got to
Yeah,
get a confused bystander there somewhere.
not holding a bottle of wine this time to check whether they're drunk. Mother and
No,
child this time. Got a
no,
bit more of a family friendly version.
no double taking pigeons either.
No double taking. Oh no, never mind. Never mind. So in terms of Bond films, were any an influence here, or which ones are your favorite?
I mean, I did drop a deliberate Easter egg in there,
Mm.
which I'll let people spot to a favorite Bond film of mine. But actually, it is interesting because one of the key movies that I was referencing throughout was Back to the Future, interestingly
Mm.
enough. So,
Mm.
if you go through it and you kind of so yeah, I mean, for me, Back to the Future, it's the perfect family thriller where there's a lot of plot, there's lots going on, it's moving quickly, there's a car, um, but there's no fat, there's no flab. And when you read this book, for me,
Mm.
it's kind of got that quality where there's nothing's wasted. it's constantly hitting the beats throughout.
Hmm.
And I kind of read it and it made me think of something like a Back to the Future or an Indiana Jones. You know, it's that fast-paced adventure. And so I was looking at those films for like, how do they frame shots? How do they zoom in on one thing to tell you like danger, or you know, this is interesting, or stop and look at this, or equally, you know, you mentioned the last picture on the last page. Uh,
Mm.
that's a direct Back to the Future callback as well.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, there was a bit of that there. You know, I was more looking at, yeah, certain movies and how they frame and create pictures rather than book illustrations. I this being my first book, I deliberately didn't really look at other book illustrators. I
Mm.
didn't, you know, I was conscious that if I went down that rabbit hole, I might accidentally, you know,
Emulate.
copy someone's style
Yeah.
or something, even without wishing to. So I kind of
Mm.
kept
Mm.
to my own source of inspiration.
It's funny what you say about this story and it being a page turner and you know, hitting the beats. You know, that's
Mm.
what Fleming always said. The number one job of a thriller is to just keep you turning the pages.
Yeah.
I've actually read some of this with my niece and nephew as well. Who well,
Mm.
my niece is in the age bracket
Yeah.
that Fleming intended, 7 to 10 year olds. My nephew is car obsessed, and this book, it still works so well for, I mean, you know, we should, perhaps shouldn't be surprised because the Bond book still works so well, but this still works so well for young people nowadays, and not so young people as well. I think I actually only read this I don't think I read this as a child. I read this as an adult, and I remember thinking, why didn't I read this sooner? So yeah, when did you actually first come to the book?
I'm pretty sure I was read it as a child. Um,
Mm,
I certainly watched the film plenty of
mm,
times. You know,
mm-hmm,
that was kind of a staple. But then when, I mean, you know, in recent times, I didn't reread it until I was asked, you know, would you be
mm.
interested in illustrating it? What would you do with it? And I went back and read it. And I think like you, I just thought, this is brilliant. This is like, you know, how have I been reading, you know, all of Fleming's Bond novels over and over again and actually not turned to this because it, you know, it does all the things those books do so well. You know, it's that relentless thriller, isn't it?
It is, and genuine. The thing that I think is brilliant about it, particularly, is Fleming doesn't skimp on the jeopardy that he puts the family
No,
into. It's
no.
really quite, you know, for should we say, for perhaps a more sensitively disposed child, things like, I mean, I'm thinking particularly like when you go to
Yeah, I
that
knew you were
descript.
going to that one.
I'm so glad you did that image,
Yeah.
because when I reread it to do my article, I read that bit and I was like, that description is actually quite disgusting and horrible.
It is,
You know,
yeah.
well done, Fleming. You know, that's going to really scare the children. You know, there are a few creepy, really creepy moments, aren't there, in this book?
Well, there is, and again, this is why I say Indiana Jones, because for me, that one, that image, the
Mm,
skeleton hanging down, it's just that, you know, it's that thing where it's like you know, I remember watching those films as a kid, and you know, you have the thing where the skeleton will come lurching out at you, and you'll scream and and then you'll laugh because it's, you know, you realize it's not real, it's just, you know,
mm.
kind of House of Horrors. And so I wanted that picture to be that, where kids would turn the page and be like, and then they'd find it funny, which so far has been the reaction. Luckily, they don't just cry and have a nightmare. You know,
Yeah.
it is actually funny after it's a, you know, a skeleton. But I didn't want to shy away from that stuff because it's what
Mm.
Fleming was writing. You kind of got to be true to it.
Well, I grew up on Roald Dahl books, which have that same kind of vibe, don't they? And obviously,
Mm.
Fleming and Dahl have all those connections, not least because Dahl co-wrote the screenplay of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, as well as writing it,
Yes, it is.
writing a Bond script.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, it has that sort of it does have that sort of Dahl-like quality of it being you feel like you're reading something, probably if you were to read this as a child, you feel like you're reading something a bit like, I shouldn't be reading this in that
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. That's exciting in itself, isn't it?
It's like a window into an adult world, which I think when I was reading the Bond books, so I read the Bond books as a kid,
Mm.
didn't actually read this one, but to my regret. But yeah, when you read the Bond books, you do get that sense, whatever age you are, that you're kind of getting a window into a more grown up world. I always think.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I remember watching License to Kill when I was far too young. It
Mm,
felt like that. I mean, that was a really adult movie when I watch it now. Like, how was I watching this aged 10, 9?
did
I
it,
don't know.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did a guy's head just explode?
Yeah, did that happen?
What?
Really?
What? I know. Yeah, there's no exploding heads in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but there's plenty of genuine jeopardy. There's also lots of sweets in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which I always find brilliant,
Yeah.
including and I'm assuming that people watching this either have read the book already or are planning to read the book and don't mind the odd spoiler, but there's a recipe for sweets, isn't there, in this, which I thought was brilliant, and
Yeah.
you had to visualize that.
Yeah, I had to draw the crumpled sheet of paper. I got
Yeah.
quite good at drawing crumpled sheets of paper because there's quite a lot of those in here. Uh, it's never
Mm.
something you expect to have to learn how to draw.
Oh
Um,
wow, yeah,
yeah, so I mean, even like there's the frank note.
yeah, and the
Um,
poster at the start. Yeah.
exactly. So I got quite good at, how to draw that. It's fun when you do a book, I find, because you, you get confronted with things that you've never had to figure out how to draw. You know,
Mm.
you draw something, you'll have this description of a scene or a moment, and you'll need to draw water, like the water of the sea with reflections, or the water of a still mill pond with reflections, and it's completely different things. And you're like, I've never drawn that. How do I do this? Especially in pen, you don't even have the luxury of color to convey it.
Mm.
So it's cool because it pushes you into figuring stuff out. The explosion on whichever chapter it is. How on earth do I draw an explosion that's going to convey an explosion? It's exciting because you can get out there and have a look at, how have other artists done this? What works? How am I going to approach this?
Did
Um,
do you feel like you sound like someone who always wants to push themselves outside their comfort zone? But I can see the posters on the wall behind you. You've got your amazing that's one of
yeah,
the Top Gun Maverick ones, isn't it? The
good.
Dark
Yeah,
Star. Yeah.
that's those two. And then yeah, that big one behind me is a painting that I did
Yeah.
um a long time ago, actually. So yeah, I mean, each poster or picture or whatever I do, I like to try and do something
Mm.
slightly new at least.
Mm.
Something I haven't tried before, even if it's a really nerdy thing that no one else would kind of think, people
Mm.
think, why are you bothering to do that? But, like afterburners, there we go. Doing afterburners on a jet, that's a really cool thing to try and do. It takes a lot of figuring out to do it right in a certain way.
Mm. I think even people who've read this book numerous times, and I've lost track of how many different editions there have been with different illustrations. But I think they're going to find this a really refreshing kind of take on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Like you were saying, everyone has probably most people have more people have seen the film than
Mm,
have possibly read the book nowadays. Certainly,
yeah.
people of our generation. Um, so I think they've got that image of what Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is like, props from the film version. And actually, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang never really looked like that in the book anyway. I mean, color wise, for a
Uh,
start. And then actually reading this, and you go, oh, my feeling on reading your version was that, oh, that's what Fleming intended. I genuinely had a sense of, which is not to dismiss the other illustrators, because I love all their work as well.
mm,
But when I read this, I was like, okay, this is probably the kind of, as you mentioned earlier, Fleming, always kind of have a bit ambivalent about modernity, but also really excited by it.
yeah,
And I think that he would have really enjoyed this edition.
that's really cool. Yeah, no, I hope so. I mean, yeah, you say about being different. I mean, I tried not to look too much. I mean, obviously, I was going through this one, which is illustrated.
Mm.
And there's some really cool things on it, in how it's done. I was trying not to look at the previous versions of Chitty at all. I didn't rewatch the movie deliberately. I didn't want to be swayed by it.
Mm.
Um, it was very much about just trying to zone all that lot out and just work in a vacuum, which is easier said than done. Um, but that to me was important. Just, make it new, make it different, because that's what I was asked to do, essentially. I mean, it's a skill you have to learn as a car designer, definitely, because you get asked to create a new car, you know, a new interpretation of you know, a brand, a model, some words, whatever it might be. You know, and your job is to deliver something which is unmistakable but respectful of everything that's
Yeah.
come before it. So there's a mindset and a skill that I think helps set me up there.
Definitely. So, do you feel like you're ready to illustrate another book of some kind, or are you going to give it a break for a while?
I, you know, yeah, I mean, a few people have asked me this, and to be honest, I think right now I'm enjoying a little break. But you know, if I was asked, I'd be, you know, really excited to hear.
You're not going to swap car designing for book illustration as a full-time job?
No, the thing about car design is it's more than yeah, it's more of an obsession than anything, you know. It, it's hard to describe, but I suppose if you're predisposed to designing cars, if you sit down and someone hands you a pen and a piece of paper, you will idly doodle a car. That's the only thing that will come out without you thinking. You know, once you start drawing cars, you're going to draw cars, you're going to sketch cars, and your creative mind is going to be thinking first and foremost about, you know, what car can I design here on this blank sheet of paper. So yeah, that's
I take it even as a kid you were like obsessed with drawing cars, and then you were one of those
yeah.
people who's turned their childhood obsession, they've actually managed to make it their profession. So
Yeah, I pretty much mapped out my car design career. I think age 7 or 8, you know, I had it all worked out, uni, internships, everything. Um, Somehow managed to stick to my 8-year-old self's plan as well, which is really
wow.
cool. But that's not uncommon when you talk to people in car design. You know, it's like people who become, you know, football players, sportsmen, racing drivers. You know, you have that drive to do it, and you know, you see these people who've made it happen from a very young age. Um, so yeah, it's
Yeah,
very much
I've
that.
got a friend who designs roller coasters for a living, and whenever I tell people that, they go, "That's not a real job." And I'm
That
like,
can't be
"No,
real.
it really is."
Yeah.
He designs roller coasters. And I remember him when he was 8, and he was designing roller coasters on a computer game, and he said, "I'm going to be a roller coaster designer," and that's now what he does. So it is possible.
Yeah, I mean, I hit that. Like people say, like, you know, that can't be a real job. You can't design supercars for a living. It's like, but they don't materialize without someone,
Mm,
you know,
mm,
a team of people making them
mm.
appear. You know, it's that simple. So, you know, someone's doing it, someone has to do it. So, you know, I've kind of always approached these things with that mindset. You know, it's, you know, there are creative people making stuff all the time, you know, really cool things, you know, be one of them. That's always been my objective on it. So
That's a really great philosophy. I love that.